Oh, you didn't have it on the, it didn't work with the Google Drive? That's fine, I'll do this. Look at this, Windows, huh?
Probably lookable.
You need Windows to see out of this thing. Where's the, here. Right, okay, cool. Do you need some?
No. Can you hear me? Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. So thank you very much for coming. Frode and I have actually been collaborating over the course of about 6 or so months. Before that, okay, I'm on hold. Okay. So as you know, the Program for the Future conference has started in 2008 with the 40th anniversary of Doug's demo in San Francisco. And since then, we've had conferences in 2010, 2013, and this one is now going to be hopefully annual. This one, 16, 17, leading up to 2018, which is, of course, the 50th anniversary of the mother of all demos. And the challenge there would be, as you would think, if Doug had retained his team and gotten, let's say, $100 million of funding between then and now, or whatever the number is that you would like, how would we be interacting today? What tools would we be using? How would we be experiencing life? Okay, that is the challenge that I think this particular conference and the collaboration I'm involved with Frode is oriented towards exploring. Okay. So out of all those series of things, I'm going to pick out 3 ideas to try and share with you. Hopefully these are 3 that are particularly relevant to text and how we think about information representation and knowledge. And these are 3 areas that I have no particular expertise, but I have a deep and intense interest. Okay, so let me just introduce it that way. There we go, okay. So the first idea is one of frustration. I am actually a relatively unsatisfied user of the word processors, the document management systems out there, the outline processors, of the few that exist. And so ever since I was working with Doug in the early 90s, the ideas about what could we do with tools and how could we be interacting have sort of been in the back of my mind as I try and struggle with the kind of tools that are provided me by each of the professional environments that I find myself in. And so I learned to love word processors and PowerPoint, unfortunately. So the way I'm thinking about this is information in forms that we ingest, personally, not in dialogue, but in forms that we actually personally interact with, are state transitions. So it takes my state, pre-ingestion of that particular artifact, and then after that artifact, I now have a new state. And so you could think about meaning as all the ripple effects, all the changes in state that I personally encounter when I actually encounter this particular artifact. Call it a document, call it a presentation, call it a text, call it a paragraph, call it a blog, whichever it is, okay? And the reason I want to say state is it's not just knowledge. It's not just what I hold in my brain. It's what I feel, it's what I experience, it's what I recall, it's what I now begin to co-create. All of those are implications of what I interact with when I come across an artifact. What this suggests to me is that there is knowledge, and then there's actually knowledge about how to present that knowledge. Let me introduce that in the next slide. So there is a reader. It's very dependent on the state of the reader, the skill set of the reader's motivation, whether or not they had sleep the previous night. And then it's also dependent on the skill set of the author, where the author wants to sequence the experience through a particular form, but they're guessing. Okay, 5 minutes, okay. So what I want to actually tease out and sort of suggest, and most of you probably are aware of this already, is that knowledge and the presentation of knowledge is actually a very nice, distinct recognition of whether or not you have a body of knowledge that needs to be presented a certain way, like I would present a certain way to my 12-year-old daughter. I would take a term and use terms that she would be familiar with, versus if I was going to introduce that to a PhD student. Let me use the following example. I want to be able to look at it in associative ways. I want to be able to map it. I will, of course, read it. I want to be able to take a look at the flow of logic. I want to look at the related associations, from a topic standpoint. And the key point that I think Doug introduced was, this needs not only to be author-controlled, but it needs to be user-controlled. And I think that notion of bringing use specs back is one I really, really would like to introduce to the next generation of dynamic knowledge repositories and text and how we write and how we author. The next idea number 2, is this idea that we travel with our own language. I think we all kind of implicitly recognize this. But many of the teams that I've been with, hopefully not too many of the teams you've been involved with, have hit some misunderstandings at some point in their execution because of a difference in usage of terms, a difference in usage of concepts. So the idea of being able to make this very explicit and making this part of the team formation step of collaboration is one that I would really like to make very explicit when teams get together. There is one example that we have among a team where Frode and I and others collaborate. We have somewhere around 300 terms that we've collected over the past 2.5 years that are actually a very nice example of how we actually refer to knowledge representation. Frode calls it this, I call it that, and then it gives us an opportunity to merge and discuss and disambiguate those ideas. So there's a project that I am proposing that we engage in that I'm right now calling Dictopedia, which is basically the tools and the practices that recognize and facilitate the fact that we each travel with our own language. Here's an example. I encounter a document, I see a term I'm not familiar with, I look at the definition. There is a definition in this little practical Dictopedia that we're looking at, but what is it? It's a very left brain, mental, intellectual definition. And yet it doesn't imply all those other aspects of meaning. It doesn't give me how I want to feel or how the author wants me to feel about particular terms. It doesn't give me associations. It doesn't give me reference. I don't know what it sounds like. I don't know how it energizes me or others. I don't even know what it looks like. I don't know what its physical manifestation is. Now, this is an abstract notion of collaborology, but if you take others like tree, you could definitely do the same question and answer for those notions as well. So if we want symbols like words in text to begin to evoke not just intellectual meanings, but emotional, physical, sensorial, experiential, I want to bring those, and then what does that imply for the authoring? What are the tooling, the reading, the skill set, the experience, the timing? Those are some of the things that we would like to explore. And by this, I want to close with this notion that meaning, again, as I repeated, is not just an intellectual definition represented by other terms, but it basically should address somatic whole body experience. I want to know what it makes me feel. I want to know what it makes me think. I want to know what it makes me associate with across all my chakras. So to summarize, 3 basic areas. The distinct separation of knowledge and presentation, and really being very clear about presentation and what it does in its role of designing experience. Getting to whole body meaning, and starting with a Dictopedia as a possible starting point. These are 3 ideas extracted from a whole family of projects that are known as knowledge management, Spreadliner, dynamic knowledge repository, Tweech, Dictopedia, Collaborology, World Educational Learning Tribe, Global Sim, Global Viz, but I just want to use that as a teaser and an invitation that we actually have more collaboration in the conversation as a result. Thank you.
Questions, comments?
Betsy? You want?
If you could please, sorry, we haven't mentioned, if you could please come to the microphones for questions. That one's yours.
Thank you for putting up with that as the first presentation right after you get some entry and coffee here.
Is that the one you were using?
This one works, right?
Yeah, this one works. Please.
Sorry, I just had a quick comment. That was fantastic. I can't wait to talk to you more about it. I just, that whole idea of using language to change state and the whole emotional whole body thing is just blowing my mind right now. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Betsy. Let's talk.
Bob, did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to ask, I knew Doug a bit, and I wondered to what degree you found some of these things in Doug's work.
Actually, that's a good question. Doug, as you know, was building the tools that he's very familiar with. On some of these things, I have taken the liberty to embrace and extend. And by embracing and extending, I'm basically trying to say, what would happen if we co-evolved, bootstrapped our capability with tools and what tools need to do for us and what we would ask of the tools. So I would not ascribe many of these ideas. I don't want to pretend that I did. But I would say that in my interpretation, they're very much extensions of the kinds of ideas and the groundwork that Doug represented.
I think it's very good, and I encourage you.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions or comments? Barry Caton, are you here?
Thank you all.
Okay, great. Thanks. You want to get ready while we finish off with a few more Sam thoughts? Please, yeah.
So usually we have this, in philosophical terms, a mind-body problem. So when you introduce the body into a discussion about language and print or text, what could you possibly mean?
I actually mean that I don't want to diminish the importance of meaning in intellectual terms and in definitional terms, by no means, because we've already done that reasonably well. What I want to do is say, how do we convey experience, how do we convey knowledge more compellingly? And would it be visual? Would it be auditory? Would it be somatic? Would it be
The whole person rather than the body?
Yes, exactly. So the use of the body is kind of a shortcut, I'm sorry. Okay, all right.
What domains would you want to do that, and what domains would you not want to tell information?
So I had a conversation with, I think, Bob from Arkansas last night about this. I would think that the ideas here are in the areas of, let's say, fiction, of relating personal experience, of, let's say, scene writing, of script writing. I'm not necessarily claiming this is appropriate for science, but I am thinking that if we're looking at text as a general tool across all domains and applications, we miss this, I think, very severely.
Hi, Sam.
Hey,
I
Leila.
wanted to just come and talk, but I'm having trouble because I'm so short. Yes. So view specs, I think, are just one of the big lost opportunities. So glad you brought it up. I think actually where I see the application is with the input of virtual reality. So that with virtual reality, it becomes very, very clear that your point of view is critical. And so I think Doug has not thought about view specs in virtual reality, but for us, it is our job to do that. And then in terms of domains of application, I think the big push in the next 20 years is going to be the digital transformation of cities. And so where view specs and virtual reality can come in is imagining what kind of living environment and working environment you could be in. And it's a way for people to explore possibilities. And I think it's very important for view specs actually to allow people to come in together and imagine together. I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen, But I know that trillions of dollars are going to be spent on the digital transformation of cities, and we have to be careful that we create the cities we want to live in, not the cities that we think we want to live in.
Thanks.